We're going to be beginning this series, The Welcome Table, and today is the title, A Call to Grace. Now, I know some of you probably hanging around from Elevate, you're like, man, same sermon over again. Yes, we're going to do it for one more week, and then we've got some plans for guest speakers to be in Elevate. So we were going to do this until got a young adult pastor, or I ran out of energy, and past couple weeks I've been drinking like a fire hydrant and trying to stay hydrated. You just get wet. So appreciate your grace in that. So we look forward to continuing on with us for the next couple weeks in this series. So here's where we're going. The welcome table, a call to grace. We're going to be in Luke chapter 5 today. We're not going to start there, but that's where we're going to finish. So if you want to follow along in your Bibles in front of you, whether you're online or here in person, go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 5. But as we begin, I want to ask you this question. If we were to think about the life of our church, think about Keene specifically, what symbol best represents the life of our church? What image pops to mind for you? If someone were to ask you, hey, what is Keene all about? Is it a choir robe? Is it a food pantry box? Is it a pulpit? Is it some Edison bulbs? Is it a Pathfinder uniform? There are many, many, many different symbols that could represent the life of our church. And if you were to ask kind of Christianity in general for today, 2022, likely the image that would come to mind for modern Christianity centers more around a stage and a pulpit or a lectern and an audience. That wasn't always the case. I'm going to take a look at a few pieces of scripture this morning that talks about Jesus' mission, what he came to do and what he came to accomplish. The first one found in Mark chapter 10, verse 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Luke 19, verse 10 puts it this way. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are what? Lost. You're familiar with that passage, right? This is classic Jesus. Seek and save the lost, a ransom for many. But we come across this passage in Luke chapter 7, verse 34, that kind of messes with the formula. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. And you say, this is Jesus speaking, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yes, Jesus was known for his ministry to seek and to save the lost. But when he was here on this earth 2,000 years ago, 3.5 years of ministry, he was called friend of tax collectors and sinners and called a glutton and a drunkard because of how much he ate and drank. Now, I'm sorry, this is a message that centers around a meal and we're bordering on lunchtime, okay? So we're gonna do our best this morning. So if you're already thinking about where you're headed to for Sabbath lunch, what you're gonna partake of this afternoon, just kind of marinate in that this morning, okay? Pun intended, all right? Jesus came eating and drinking. I like how the author Tim Chester puts it in A Meal with Jesus. He says, speaking about these three passages, he says the first two statements are of purpose. Why did Jesus come? He came to serve and to give his life as a ransom, to seek and to save the lost. The third, the one we just read, is a statement of method. How did Jesus come? Well, he came eating and drinking. In this series over the next few weeks and a couple months that we're going to be here, we're going to be journeying through the book of Luke. Robert Karras puts it this way, talking about Luke. I love the name of his book, Eating Your Way Through Luke's Gospel. Like, that's just a really cool title for a commentary on Luke. Robert Karras puts it this way. In Luke's gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. Perhaps Luke, the good doctor, would agree with Paul with a little bit of wine, a little bit of something for the stomach, and all will be well, right? One of the ways that we can see Luke's organization is through the meals that Jesus was going to, at, or coming from in the Gospel of Luke. And we're going to be journeying through those the next couple weeks. Here's the context for where we are today. Luke chapter 5, verse 27. We're going to get there in a second. In Luke chapter 4 and Luke chapter 5, Jesus is beginning his ministry. The nativity is kind of in the rearview mirror. His time in Egypt is in the rearview mirror. And we get to Luke 4, and Jesus stands up in front of the synagogue, likely in a gathering like we have today. And he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, to break free the captives, to set loose the prisoner, to bring healing, to bring sight to the blind." And then he goes on and he does the very thing that he's just said. He goes on this just healing spree. leaving no one hurting or diseased in the communities that he visits. He calls Peter, he calls Andrew, he calls James, and he calls John, the new disciples. He heals a paralytic, he heals a leper. In every single space Jesus goes into was marked by an understanding in society and kind of the way the religious system had been structured. Jesus generally entered unclean spaces. You don't go up to a leper and give them a hug. You would stay quite a distance from them and they would be ostracized to a particular part of the community. But Jesus would enter those spaces. And it's often that when Jesus enters an unclean space, he leaves that space clean and whole. Completely backwards to the way the system was set up at that time. So we read Luke chapter 5, we're going to start off in verse 27. Later, as Jesus left that town, he saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at his tax collector's booth. "Follow me and be my disciple," Jesus said to him in verse 28. So Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. A word on Levi. We know him as Levi, we know him as Matthew. It's the same person throughout the Gospels. Levi is a tax collector. And in a lot of ways in the Jewish society, he is the lowest of the low. The guy that you don't want to invite over to your dinner party. Because, see, the Jews were under Roman oppression. Rome had taken over, and Rome was forcing the Jews to pay taxes. And if it wasn't insulting enough to pay taxes to a foreign nation, the Romans used Jews to collect those taxes. And so Levi was seen as someone who was really betraying his family and his heritage to be able to earn a living for himself. And tax collectors get a really bad rap. Probably there was some decent tax collectors, and there's just the small amount of them that were really corrupt, but it happens today. Kind of the middleman takes a chunk out of the pie and like upcharges for things, right? So tax collectors knew what the government required and would charge a little bit more, right? About that much more, and would be able to live on that, and they would take it for themselves. You know the story of Zacchaeus when Jesus calls him to have dinner with him. We might look at that story in this series. Zacchaeus says, "I'm going to pay back everything I owe fourfold." Tax collectors got rich off the backs of the people, and Levi was not a welcome person in society. And who is Jesus? To walk up to a tax collection booth, to Levi, look him in the eyes and say, "Levi, follow me." Imagine how lonely Levi's life was. Ostracized by his community, and someone was willing to look at him, not give him a glare or a frustrated look or an eye of disdain, but to look at him and say, "Levi, follow me. You have a place to belong right beside me." I think there was a place of desire in Levi's heart, a place that needed to be whole, and Jesus filled that space for him. And so without a question, without checking his 401k, his pension, or his retirement plan, Levi got up, left everything, and followed Jesus. How many of us would be willing to do that today? The story continues. Levi is pretty excited. Verse 29, we read that he's going to throw a party. Later, Levi held a banquet in his home with Jesus as the guest of honor. Many of Levi's fellow tax collectors and other guests also ate with them. Levi throws a party. He's super excited. "Guys, I've met someone amazing and I need you to meet him as well." And Jesus was seated at a place of honor in a tax collector's home, and there were tax collectors and other guests that ate with them. It's a beautiful picture of a space that Jesus is willing to enter into that the community at large really isn't. And at this time, meals were super important to the life of the community. You couldn't have a business transaction without having a meal with someone beforehand. Before you settled the terms, you needed to sit down and see eye to eye. Really get into closer relationship. Table fellowship indicated an intimate relationship among those sharing it. There was a mutual acceptance. When you sat down at the table with someone else, you were accepting them and they were accepting you. And we do this every week. It's become the life of our church. If you come in during some of our earlier services, starting at 9:30 in the morning, we got some breakfast snacks out and some cold drinks. During the summer, we'll do some hot ones during the winter, right? And it's so beautiful to see in our lobby people communing with one another, taking a moment to pause and to talk, to be with one another in this space. So I bumped into someone just last week and they said, "Hey, how does this work? How do we fund this? How do people get involved? I love seeing our community gathered together. And I said, I agree. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Sean Brace, he's an Adventist pastor up in Maine. He wrote a book called The Table I Long For. He says this: welcoming others into your home is one of the most vulnerable and authentic ways you can pursue God's mission. Sharing a meal, sharing community with those around you is one of the most honest and authentic ways you can share God's mission. You can be on purpose. Remember, a couple of years ago, my wife and I had just gotten married and we moved to Michigan so I could study at Andrews University. And we got this little postage stamp of an apartment that you could put us inside and our stuff and shake it and you could hear it rattle, right? It's that small and we're just right fresh starting off in graduate school. And, growing up, my parents had invited people over to home, but I was never the one responsible for the welfare of the people that entered the home, right? You just kind of were just along for the ride. But we got to the point where we're like, hey, we'd like to invite some of our friends over, some people that we've just met in the past few weeks that we've hit it off with, fellow seminarian couples, like, let's invite somebody over for a meal. And we got to the day when it was supposed to happen. It was the first time that Melissa and I had invited somebody other than family into our home as a married couple. And the question started going through our minds, how clean is the bathroom? Is the living room organized? And oh yeah, that's the closet where we stuff everything in, and we've got to remember to tell them, do not open that door, right? Question after question after question. The meal was fun. As soon as we got in, the nerves left and we were able to enjoy fellowship. And, sometimes it's uncomfortable too, not just inviting somebody over, but one of the biggest discomforts is inviting people over and then not knowing when they're gonna leave, right? You've been there and you've kind of tried to encourage and you say, well, tonight's just been really great, hasn't it? And they're like, yeah. And the conversation continues for like another hour and a half, right? Just a word to the wise, if someone has said how nice the evening is about 3 or 4 times, that's probably your cue to kind of, head on out, right? But sometimes it's that vulnerable space, right? You're inviting someone into your place of comfort and it's messing with your schedule and it's something different than what you're used to. And at this party, that same thing is going on, and there's some others that are part of the group that don't quite see it the same way as Levi and Jesus did. Luke chapter 5, verse 30, the story continues on. But the Pharisees and other teachers of religious law complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples. Why do you eat and drink with such scrum? Can we say that in church? I think we can. I did it in the other services. Other translations will take this passage and they'll say, literally in Greek it says, why would you eat with tax collectors and sinners? And remember, Luke just a verse before said, who was on the guest list? Tax collectors and other guests. So the Pharisees have made a value assumption about who's on the guest list. Going after Jesus' disciples, why are you eating with such scrum? The bottom of the bottom. Isn't your master, isn't he a good Jew? Isn't he a good teacher, one who would uphold the religious law? You see, banquets are supposed to be joyous occasions, right? They're supposed to be places that are happy and we're able to enjoy one another's company, but this group is upset. And the Pharisees are upset, not that the party is going on, but with who's on the guest list. Levi, you didn't check that. No, he didn't. You see, who we include at our table and how we describe them says more about who we are than who they are. The Pharisees had it in their heart that group of people gathered in Levi's house was the bottom of the bottom. It was mud on their feet. Jesus doesn't give a chance for the disciples to respond, probably wisely, but he cuts in and he defends them. Luke chapter 5, verse 31. Jesus answered them, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. Verse 32. Do you have verse 32? Yeah. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners and need to repent. Jesus responds directly in the face of the prejudice of the Pharisees. He says, I've come to heal the sick. I'm a doctor. I'm the one who's got the cure, and I'm willing to give it to all who would receive it. And I'm willing to give it to those who receive, not those who think that they're righteous, but those who are truly in need. Jesus goes to those who will recognize their need of him. You see, grace is found at the table with Jesus. Grace is found at the table with Jesus. Where Jesus is, grace abounds. His presence at that party is grace infused. He welcomes the marginalized, the least, the last, the lost, and confronts self-righteousness. He says, if I'm the doctor, don't you think that I've come to be amongst the sick? So really, true salvation is being welcomed to God's feast, to having a seat at the table. And the Pharisees aren't having it. They gather back another day, Luke 5:33. One day, some people said to Jesus, John the Baptist's disciples fast and pray regularly, and so did the disciples of the Pharisees. So there's a practice at the time that the more you fasted and the more you prayed, the more religiously pious you appeared, the more spiritual you were. And looking at the Old Testament, really the only prescription for the Jews to fast came around the Day of Atonement, the day when the priest would go into the most holy place and atone for the sins of the people. And that had morphed into a more strict following of fasting, that the religious leaders at the time would fast on Mondays and Thursdays. I don't know why they picked those days. That's just the days that they picked. Mondays and Thursdays would be the day. And they would dress themselves in a way that you would know that they were fasting. They make themselves look more gaunt and like they were really, really in pain from not eating. And they thought themselves to be more spiritually pure because they practiced this. And so what the Pharisees are saying to Jesus' disciples is that they're not just being criticized for eating with sinners, but for having a lifestyle that seems to be in contrast with proper religious decorum. You're not doing what we've always done to practice spirituality, and so you must be in the wrong. And Jesus replies to this group, Luke 5, verse 34. Got the next verse, Luke 5, 34. Jesus responded, do wedding guests fast while celebrating with the groom? If you want to insult the bride and groom on their wedding day, don't eat the food, right? When you are invited into somebody's presence and they place food down in front of you, whether you've just had a meal or not, it's probably good for you to eat that food. Now, medical reasons and allergies aside, all those kinds of things. Jesus equates himself with the bridegroom. He says, when we're having a party, don't we feast together? Someday the groom will be taken away from them and they will fast. Jesus foreshadowing his death. He says, while I'm here, why don't we celebrate? The good news of the gospel is seated in your midst, and Jesus is pushing back against the religious system at the time. Ellen White puts it this way in Desire of Ages, page 280. I love what she says. She's a little bit kind of in the middle on some other things, but this one she's unequivocally clear. A legal religion can never lead souls to Christ. Our own works can never purchase salvation. It's about as clear as you get. Can't argue with that. No matter how much money you have, no matter how good your works are, none of them can purchase the free gift of salvation that God has given to you. And these Pharisees at the time are looking at the disciples. They're doing something different. They're not following in the way of what has been before. And they must be doing something wrong. And Jesus says, it's not how you get to grace. And he continues and he uses a couple of illustrations, Luke 5, 36 through 39. Then Jesus gave them this illustration. No one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and uses it to patch an old garment, for then the new garment would be ruined and the new patch wouldn't even match the old garment. You ever worn jeans when you were little and your mom patched them, right? Sometimes the fabric doesn't quite match. And I don't know about you, but my mom would patch my jeans and about 3 weeks later, she'd have to patch them again. Just kind of this perpetual rip that just, I thought it was cool and I would get away with it for a while to have like the holes in the jeans. And then I would, one morning wake up and put on my jeans and like, oh, there's patches on my jeans. Thanks, Mom, right? Nowadays you can buy them pre-ripped. I don't know, I guess they cost more. I think they should cost less, right? And Jesus continues, no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the new wine would burst the wineskin, spilling the wine and ruining the skins. Verse 38, new wine must be stored in new wineskins. Verse 39, but no one who drinks the old wine seems to want the new wine. The old is just fine, they say. And we're good Adventists, so we overlook this passage, right? It's talking about wine, and we're not going to go there. Here's what Jesus is trying to articulate with the patch and with the wine. My word, says Jesus, is meant as a total replacement, not as a source of useful patches. This isn't take whatever we've done before and baptize it. I am bringing something completely new before you. And I think sometimes we treat Jesus as kind of that addition that we can just put on, right? Just kind of an amendment or an appendix. Like as easy as you can put it in, you can kind of take it out, right? It's just kind of in and out, and like we just kind of smear a little Jesus here and there. That's not the case. Jesus brings not a patch, but a whole new garment. And we see this throughout the entirety of Scripture, of Jesus bringing the new garment for his people. Read the book of Revelation, when the people of God are standing on the sea of glass, what are they dressed in? An old patchwork of clothes that's kind of got a little bit of the old earth and a little bit of the new earth in it. And yeah, like here's got this really cool God patch on my knee, and like here's that other thing on the shoulder, right? No, we're clothed in robes of white. Completely new garments before God. Jesus brings not a patch, but a whole new garment. He brings a new way for us to live. Jesus' teaching was completely incompatible with the Jewish religion of the time. The Jewish religion said, we are the people of God, and the only way for you to access that family is to follow strictly our rules and regulations. And Jesus breaks that open completely, one meal at a time. He says that's not what the kingdom of God is truly like. And how do we interpret that passage about wine, right? How do we get to there? Because you get it, right? Wine ferments after a while, and if it's in a skin, it'll stretch out, and that you remove the wine and the skin may become a little bit brittle. If you put new wine in there, it begins to stretch again, that skin is gonna break. And then that other little piece at the end about the old wine, people tasting the old wine and being like, that's good enough, I don't need the new stuff. See, here's the thing. Sometimes we can get so comfortable with the way things have been that we're not willing to try something new. Here's how this became apparent for me this week. I'm studying this passage and this happened, and I'm like, okay, God, this is something I need to work on in my life. My wife and I are busy preparing a nursery for a baby boy that's coming. I apologize ahead of time. I'm pretty excited, so you're just gonna hear about it, okay? So just bear with me. We're doing the nursery. We got the crib and the changing station and everything else. And we wanted to make, or to paint an accent wall. Like that's the thing you do today, right? And so we're going after this sage green color, kind of safari animals. Like it's gonna be a really cool vibe for our son. He's gonna love it, I know. As soon as he comes home, he's gonna be like, yes, thank you. That's what I was looking for. But we're going to the store this week to pick out the paint. And I'm in some ways a chip off the old block that there's just a routine, like my dad had a routine, like there's just stuff that we do and that's the way we do it, and there's gonna be no changing in that. So there's a particular home improvement store that I like to frequent. I'm not gonna tell you the name of that store, it's not important. But I like going to that store. I won't go to any other store, that's the store I'm gonna go to. And there's a particular brand of paint that I have come to appreciate because I've used it before. So we go into that store and it's where, you know, all the colors are on the wall, the rainbow and everything else. We're gonna try to find this sage green color we're looking for. And we're starting to pick out swatches, and we're at the spot where I'm in my comfort zone because I know this paint and I know these colors. But we get to the point is we're comparing greens that not all greens are made alike, right? There's some that are a little bit more yellow, some a little more blue, a little bit more gray. It's different. And we're trying to find the color. Melissa's got this like color in mind. And we get down to kind of two options that neither of us are really happy with. And I'm ready to settle because it's like, I know the paint, I'm happy with that. Like let's go with this one. She's like, why don't we check out the other side with the other brand and their colors? Like, nah, but I'm comfortable. I know this paint. And my wife, bless her heart, gently disciples me from one side of the paint aisle to the other. And I'm forever grateful because about the second color she pulls off the shelf, she's like, this is the one. And we compare it to the others, like we couldn't find it on the other side. And if I had been content with the old, had been content with what my comfort zone was, we would have never gotten to the place that we are today. And by the way, I painted it this week. I don't know, they probably make the paint in the same factory, but it went on the wall just fine, and it was the color it was supposed to be. You know, they make it the same place, put different labels on it, say it's a different price, all that kind of stuff. I don't know, it could be. But here's the thing. We can be so comfortable with the way things have used to be in our lives that were never willing to try something new. And in a way, what Jesus is inviting his disciples here is to try something new, something completely out of the paradigm with what the religious system is built up. Now, I'm not advocating to burn it all down and let's raise the church and start over and do something new. I mean, maybe we need it. I don't know. But what I would encourage you to do is consider what in your life has been the old way that you've always done it, and maybe God's inviting you to taste of something new. Because at this dinner, Jesus has a vision. He's got a vision of something coming in the future. And I like how Sean Brace puts it in continuing that book, The Table I Long For. He says, sitting at the table together isn't something we do in addition to church. It is one of the most foundational expressions of church. How does Sean know it? How do I know it? What's the vision of Jesus? Isaiah 25, verse 6. Put that up on the screen for you. In Jerusalem, the Lord of heaven's armies will spread a wonderful feast for all the people of the world. It will be a delicious banquet with clear, well-aged wine and choice meat. Somebody came up to me after service, in first service, and they said, hey, my translation says Welch's and Worthington. I don't know where you get off. I don't know how to explain it. We can talk about that one later. There he will remove the cloud of gloom, the shadow of death that hangs over the earth. Won't you long for the shadow of death to be removed? I know I do. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away all tears. He will remove forever all insults and mockery against his land and people. The Lord has spoken. This banquet, this table is the one that Jesus has in mind as he's sitting with his disciples. And if he's not thinking about Isaiah 25, he's thinking about something like it, because he lives it consistently throughout the Gospels, spreading a welcome table for people to come and sit at. My invitation for you this morning is that the welcome table is a call to grace. Jesus extends grace to the tax collectors and the other guests that are in attendance at Levi's banquet. The welcome table is a call to grace. And that table, a beautiful feast, all are welcome at the table.
Thanks for stopping by. I hope and pray that this message was a blessing for you. If you'd like to see more content like this, we need your help. You can support the Keene Seventh Adventist Church Media Ministry by going to adventistgiving.org, finding the Keene Seventh Adventist Church in Texas, and then putting in your donation to the media line. Your faithful giving and support allows us to spread the gospel online for you and others to participate in. Thank you for your continued support of the Keene Seventh Adventist Church.